Our story begins with our hero, Rude, known as the only adventurer in the world capable of breaking prohibitions. Here, we see Rude standing and eating the raw flesh of a monster he has slain. At this moment, we see that Rude's hand is broken and his back is severely injured. However, moments later, the wound on his back begins to heal. At this moment, we see Rude acquiring the roar skill and the battle axe skill. After that, he roars and all his wounds heal. At that time, many monsters appear in front of him. Rude readies his weapon, and we learn that in this world, it has been recorded by a noble that eating monsters is forbidden because anyone who does so will absorb evil essence. Meanwhile, Rude continues to slay the monsters attacking him and suddenly feels the first effect of eating the monster, which is a great surge of energy that allows him to easily fight off many monsters. However, the second symptom begins to appear: severe headaches, dizziness, and poisoning. These symptoms keep Rude in place without attacking, and he tells himself that he will take revenge on those who threw him into this place. At that moment, the third symptom that should appear is poisoning and sudden death. However, for Rude, the situation is different because he does not die but rather transforms into a monster by absorbing the evil essence. Rude becomes very strong and starts brutally killing and eating all the monsters around him. Every time he eats a monster, he gains new skills like evaluation, sound awareness, and absorption. Meanwhile, the problem does not end because a large snake appears in front of Rude. Rude takes a bite from the wolf he has killed and gains agility and jumping skills. Then he leaps at high speed towards the snake, thrusts his spear into it, and uses his golden lightning skill to attack the snake. Rude continues his journey after killing the snake, and as usual, every bite of a monster gives him new skills. Rude then takes a short break, and we see that he has killed all the monsters in that place and feels happy because this way, he can survive. However, unfortunately, he does not have time to rest because he sees a large number of other monsters in front of him. Rude is shocked by the number and continues to curse the monsters, saying that no matter what happens, he will return alive and go back to his home. To understand everything, let's go back in time a bit, specifically to the city of Balon, located on the border. We know that this city is special because there are many labyrinths, one of which is the Swamp Labyrinth, which is very difficult. After all, the air inside has a very negative effect on adventurers who enter. Therefore, it is natural that every adventurer hates this labyrinth. However, our hero, Rude, is different from other adventurers because he often enters this labyrinth and is even known as the Swamp Explorer. At that time, Rude was very happy to be in the labyrinth because he found many swamp plants that usually only existed on the 6th floor of the labyrinth. These plants are very useful for purifying swamp air and are a source of income for Rude. Rude continues to pick the plants until he has gathered enough to last for 3 days. Rude starts moving to exit the labyrinth, but suddenly he hears a sound nearby and sees a swamp rat that can use poison like other monsters in the swamp. Most adventurers avoid fighting these rats. The rats start emitting poison gas from their mouths, but Rude is unaffected because he is different from other adventurers. He uses his sword to fight the rats and manages to kill them, but then another group of rats attacks him. 2 rats attack Rude, but he manages to kill one of them. However, the other rat jumps onto his hand and Rude struggles against it. Fortunately, at that moment, another adventurer arrives and uses a fireball to kill the rat. Rude falls to the ground, surprised by the explosion in front of him. The adventurer who used the fireball approaches Rude and says that he tried to help him. Rude thanks him without enthusiasm and says that the adventurer should have informed him before doing anything because he was almost hurt. The adventurer responds that he shouted fireball very loudly to try to get Rude's attention. Their conversation is interrupted by a third adventurer who says to his friends that he has found a field of swamp plants. His friends are very happy to hear this and say that they are very lucky today. Rude feels strange about the incident and asks if they followed him to find the field. The short adventurer looks nervous and says that they just happened to meet and help Rude. They shout that Rude did not even thank them for their help and deserved punishment. The 3 adventurers prepare to hit Rude. Rude feels angry and confused but finally apologizes and thanks them. Time passes until night falls, and we see Rude in a restaurant called Full Belly. There, 2 people hold Rude and hit him, saying that his presence in the restaurant makes the place stink. One of them approaches Rude and uses his ability to emit fire from his hands, saying that an adventurer should have the ability to defeat monsters. However, since Rude only has the skill to remove negative effects, he is not considered a true adventurer. At that time, we learn that Rude's unique skill is the ability to detoxify, which is very useful for exploring swamps but not enough to defeat monsters. Because of this, no team wants to recruit him, and everyone calls him the Swamp Explorer because he only searches for resources in the early parts of the swamp. Rude leaves the restaurant feeling very disappointed because he is considered a failure as an adventurer. He enters the guild and is surprised to see the place crowded, which is unusual. The officer sees him and asks if he needs something. Upon seeing his face, the officer recognizes Rude and tells him that a new labyrinth has been discovered. Rude feels excited because new labyrinths are usually full of treasures and magical items, which is a great opportunity for adventurers. Rude then realizes the reason for the crowded place and is not surprised. The officer continues by saying that the price of the swamp plants Rude sells will drop from 100 coins to only 30 coins. Rude is shocked and angry to hear this and asks why. The officer explains that the swamp labyrinth is not very popular, and now with the new labyrinth, the demand for swamp plants has dropped drastically because no one wants to enter the swamp labyrinth. Rude falls silent and is shocked to hear the officer's explanation that the new labyrinth is in the Ophelio Mountains and he is not allowed to enter it. Rude asks why, and the officer explains that one of the requirements to enter the labyrinth is that the adventurer must be at least Class D. However, since Rude is currently in Class E, he does not qualify to enter. Rude feels even angrier and more frustrated and asks if there is any other way to get in. The officer replies that it is the rule, and if Rude tries to enter, he will die. At that moment, Rude hears someone speaking to him. He looks in the direction of the voice and finds someone offering to join his team as a porter. Rude does not think long and agrees to the offer. Sometime later, they ride a horse-drawn carriage and depart for the labyrinth. On the journey, the team members feel bored because of the dull journey. The team leader speaks to Rude and says that he is glad Rude joined because they had difficulty finding a porter. Rude agrees that finding a porter is indeed difficult because most adventurers gather in the new labyrinth. Another team member asks why the team leader chose Rude when many others are better. Rude has been an adventurer for a long time, and surely he is more experienced than the newcomers. After that, Bayer introduces himself to Rude and says, "My name is Bayer, and I am the leader of the Red Sword Party. This girl is Sasha, and this boy is Rick. The three of us are adventurers from this class." Rude also introduces himself and says that he is an adventurer from Class A. Bayer then responds, "Before we go any further, I want to see your guild card to know your abilities." Rude listens and shows his guild card, which displays all his traits and abilities in front of them. Bayer looks at the traits and asks if Rude can use fire magic. Rude answers, "I can use it, but the fire effect is very weak against monsters, so I only use it for cooking." Bayer is a bit disappointed but tries to comfort him and says, "The skill will still be useful, and we can rely on you." The team then continues their journey and finally arrives at the labyrinth. They get off the carriage and are impressed by the view of the labyrinth from the outside. Bayer tells the team, "Get ready, we have finally arrived at this new labyrinth." The team is very excited, and Sasha observes that the place is very quiet and says, "It seems we are the first ones to get here." Rick replies, "If so, let's get in quickly to explore it first." They entered the labyrinth, but they were surprised to find the place crowded with people gathering all the treasures inside. Sasha was angry about the crowd, and Bayer remarked that it seemed like the entire first floor had been explored. Rick suggested, "What if we go deeper into the labyrinth? There must be fewer adventurers there." Sasha quickly agreed without thinking, but Rude reminded them that this was a new labyrinth and they should map it out first. Rick and Sasha were annoyed with Rude and said, "You're just a pack mule, you're useless for anything else because you're old from the A rank." Bayer tried to calm the situation and told Rick and Sasha that Rude wasn't entirely wrong. However, he also proposed that they should search for treasures because they were right. They continued their journey to the fourth floor, and suddenly a wolf appeared and attacked Rude. Rude was terrified, but Rick quickly intervened and killed the wolf with a single blow. Rick smiled at Rude and said, "Try not to be afraid of weak monsters like this." Meanwhile, Sasha and Bayer were also fighting other wolves. Rude was impressed by Bayer's strength and wanted to join the battle, but his body wouldn't move, which frustrated him. After some time, the team managed to defeat all the wolves in the area. Sasha said that coming here was the right decision because they were now alone. Bayer was also pleased and put a ring on his finger, saying that the monsters here weren't too strong and they had managed to get good treasures. Rick called out to Rude loudly and said, "Come on, gather the loot from the monsters I killed." Rude replied that he wouldn't collect anything because the magic stones were likely damaged. Rick got angry and said, "You better listen, because those stones might not be damaged." Rude felt a bit pressured but was forced to listen to Rick. He went to the first wolf and found it severely damaged and smelling terrible. Rude lit a fire in his hand and burned part of the wolf, hoping the situation would improve. Rick saw this and mocked him, saying that Rude might be cooking the wolf to eat it. Rick then realized he was hungry after exploring for a long time and started thinking about eating the wolf meat. Sasha told him to stop saying disgusting things because eating monster meat was considered taboo and no one knew what could happen. Rick smiled and said he was just joking and would buy better food. However, suddenly there was a loud noise and high pressure that made the whole team feel pain. At that moment, a minotaur appeared and leaped towards them. The team was shocked to see it because they couldn't believe there was a minotaur on such a low floor. Rude was also surprised and wondered why a B-rank monster was here. The minotaur started moving towards the adventurers, and Rick and Sasha were very scared, saying that they had no way to defeat such a monster. Bayer took a bag of treasures and told Rude, "I want you to watch the monster's movements." Rude was worried and asked if Bayer had a plan. Bayer smiled slyly and held his sword, saying that he had a great plan. He then attacked Rude with his sword, shocking Rude. Bayer told Rick and Sasha to proceed with their plan. Rick used a skill to motivate the warriors and threw an axe near Rude, making the Minotaur target Rude. Sasha used a skill to speed up the three of them except for Rude so they could escape quickly. Rude finally understood their plan and asked if they had intended to do this from the beginning. Bayer laughed evilly and said, "Why do you think we brought someone like you?" Rude was furious and watched them escape, leaving him behind. He screamed in anger and cursed them as the Minotaur raised its axe to attack Rude. Rude stood in place, very scared. However, he managed to dodge the attack, causing the Minotaur's axe to fall to the ground. Rude smiled and wondered if dodging this attack would actually help or if he would still die. Suddenly, he felt very tired and thought this might be the end for him. The Minotaur attacked with its elbow to Rude's stomach, causing the ground beneath them to break and Rude to fall to the lower floor. Rude lost consciousness, but after some time, he opened his eyes and wondered if he was still alive or dead. He found the Minotaur lying beneath him, dead. Rude felt relieved but also hopeless, thinking that he would die here from bleeding or starvation. After some time, Rude was very hungry and started thinking about eating the Minotaur. However, he mocked his thoughts, thinking it would be a disaster. He closed his eyes, feeling sad about his miserable life. Suddenly, he remembered his father putting his hand on his shoulder when he was a child, saying that he should never give up no matter what happens. Rude jolted back to reality and started eating the Minotaur's meat ravenously because it was his only way to survive. He knew that eating a monster could cause someone to turn into a monster, but he had no choice. After eating the Minotaur's meat, unexpected changes happened to Rude. His appearance became terrifying, and he felt a new strength. In that place, bats were attacking Rude. He used a skill called Roar that emitted a horrible sound, scaring the bats. Many bats died because of the roar, while the others kept attacking Rude. However, Rude had changed. He used a physical enhancement skill, making his muscles grow bigger and his strength increase. With an axe in his hand, he attacked the bats, splitting them in two, and ate some of them. As explained earlier, he gained new skills from the bats. This echolocation ability was very useful in the dark because it made him like a bat, able to recognize all creatures around him easily. At that moment, the place was completely dark, and he saw some monsters moving towards Rude. Rude noticed the monsters and saw that they were coming in groups. He smiled and held his axe, saying, "Who will be eaten? Me or these monsters?" Soon, Rude attacked another Minotaur, cutting off its hands and neck and hitting the smaller monsters. During the battle, Rude realized that the war axe he carried suited him perfectly. Thanks to his bat-like abilities, he could now sense the presence of monsters without having to see them. Rude continued fighting and split another monster in two. The monster's eyes flew, and Rude stood in front of it, opened his mouth, and swallowed it. Although tired, because he had just eaten part of the monster, he felt his energy increase. He prepared himself, gripping his axe tightly, and ready to face the monsters coming at him with enthusiasm. After some time, Rude finished what he was doing and exited the labyrinth door. He couldn't believe that he had finally gotten out of that labyrinth. He threw his axe and said, "I finally got out of this labyrinth." Suddenly, he shouted, "I got out alive in the end and didn't die." On the other side, we moved to the Adventurers Guild, where there was a commotion and all the adventurers there were very sad. An old man stood in front of the team that Rude used to follow and said to them, "I understand from your words that you all fled the labyrinth and left Rude alone to die. We know that this man is named Lancaris, head of the Bellona Fire Guild branch." At that moment, he looked sad and said to Lancaris, "We fled as soon as we encountered the Minotaur, and Rude was killed before we could do anything for him." He continued with great emotion and said, "I wish we could go back in time to save him." At the same time, Sasha also pretended to cry, and Rick tried to comfort her. Lancaris tried to calm them and said, "I understand your situation," and then gave the order to temporarily ban entry into the labyrinth. At that moment, a guild employee was sitting there and listening to the conversation very bored. But a few seconds later, he saw something in front of him and was shocked. It turned out that Rude was still alive and entered through the guild door. Everyone there couldn't believe it because they thought he was dead. Of course, Bayer and his team were very angry and disappointed. Even Lancaris was surprised. Quickly, Bayer continued his act, running towards Rude and asking if he was okay. Then he got closer and said, "If you say anything unnecessary, you will be killed." Rick and Sasha also pretended to be happy that Rude was still alive and said, "We planned to come back and look for you, but unfortunately the labyrinth was already closed." Rude remained standing in his place without uttering a word. Bayer tried to divert attention and said to everyone, "Let's celebrate now because Rude isn't dead after all." Bayer and Rick tried to move Rude to the celebration venue, but they were surprised when Rude stayed put and refused to move at all. Suddenly, Rude spoke loudly and revealed that the team had used him as bait. Bayer was very worried about Rude's words, and everyone in the guild was shocked. Bayer quickly approached him nervously and said, "What are you talking about?" Lancaris stopped Bayer and asked Rude to explain what he meant by bait. Rude responded and told them that Bayer had stolen all his belongings and even attacked him from behind. Rude also said that Rick used his abilities to make the Minotaur target him, while Sasha used a speed spell to escape. Bayer continued to feign innocence and told Lancaris that Rude was lying. Lancaris didn't believe him and said, "Wait here, everyone. We will find out the truth now." At that moment, a woman who looked like a sorceress entered the room. Bayer and his team were shocked and frightened to see her because she was a truth enforcer who rarely left the capital city of the kingdom. Lancaris informed the team that he had noticed many porters dying, so he requested the truth enforcer to come here. Bayer's team grew even more terrified upon hearing this. Lancaris immediately asked the truth enforcer to reveal who was lying. Her eyes glowed blue, and she said that Bayer's team was lying. Then she raised her glowing staff and declared that Rude was telling the truth. Bayer was furious and didn't know what to do. All the adventurers in the room were also angry at the team. Suddenly, Bayer shouted, "How could the truth enforcer know this when she wasn't there?" Lancaris was surprised by the question and said, "You know she has the power of truth. We saw some information about this ability and found that it was very rare and powerful." Lancaris stared at Bayer and said, "No lie can escape this ability." He then asked, "How can we not trust someone who uses their abilities for the good of the country?" Bayer began to sweat in fear, and Lancaris continued, "Abandoning a team member is a forbidden act. Bayer's team deliberately used Rude as bait to be killed. Therefore, your team will be punished. You will no longer be adventurers and will become slaves." Sasha and Rick couldn't believe it and began to cry because they didn't want to become slaves. Bayer hung his head and tensely said, "If I'm going to be a slave, I have to do something first." He glared at the truth enforcer with hateful eyes, then quickly drew his sword and leaped to attack her. However, Rude didn't let it happen, running and standing in front of the truth enforcer to protect her. Rude said to Bayer, "I will never let you touch even a hair on the truth enforcer's head." Bayer was shocked that Rude could stop his attack. Rude then hit Bayer so hard that his teeth broke, and Bayer was thrown against the wall. Everyone was astonished by Rude's strength. After some time, Rude went to the guild's reception room with Lancaris and a staff member. Lancaris spoke to Rude and apologized for the inconvenience. Rude replied that it was no problem and asked what would happen to Bayer's team. Lancaris informed him that the three had been arrested and would be interrogated. If it was proven that they used porters as bait, all their assets would be confiscated and their rights as adventurers revoked. The assets would become Rude's property. A staff member handed a bag of money to Rude. Lancaris told Rude that the bag contained around 200,000 coins and asked Rude to take it. Rude was very happy and couldn't believe it, then took the bag and left the reception room. He hugged the money bag joyfully because now he could cover many living expenses. He said to himself, "If I relied on swamp plants, it would take me a long time to get this amount of money. Now I realize that adventurers can make a lot of money." He looked at the adventurers around him and was amazed because no one insulted or bothered him. This was because they had all seen what Rude had done earlier. Rude decided not to stand out because his sudden increase in strength could make people suspicious. He said, "The best solution right now is to return to the swamp and earn money as usual." He tried not to feel down and reminded himself that he had earned enough money and should buy good equipment and his favorite food. After leaving that place, Rude went to the equipment store and was surprised to find a magic bag priced at 200,000 coins. Because of the price, he decided to buy food instead. The day passed, and the next day, Rude went to the swamp labyrinth and easily killed the rats there. He said to himself, "I remember 2 days ago, I couldn't defeat 5 rats at once." Then he used his exploration eye ability, which he acquired after eating a small monster's eye. Rude was surprised to find that he could now easily kill level 9 rats. He began to wonder how far his strength had developed. Here, he took out his status card and checked it, and was very surprised to see that his level had reached 42 and all his attributes had significantly increased. Rude couldn't believe it because his level yesterday morning was still at the previous level. He then thought that this was very rare and decided to look at his skills as well. Quickly, he opened his skill list and was very happy because his skills had increased significantly. At that moment, Rude remembered something. When he returned from the new labyrinth, he saw the destroyed wall back to normal. Therefore, he wanted to return to the labyrinth again and find out what had happened there, but unfortunately, the labyrinth was temporarily closed. So, he decided to continue in the swamp labyrinth and see what was on the deeper floors. He also remembered that the magic bag was a joke item and decided that he had to choose the right monster to test his strength. Rude entered the 6th floor and there he easily killed monsters. He continued what he was doing until he finally reached the 133rd floor. There, he saw that the monsters were too weak for him and not suitable for testing his strength, so he went deeper into the labyrinth floors to find more suitable monsters. He reached the 24th floor, which looked more organized, and saw an armored monster with a very strong weapon. At that moment, Rude hid and used his investigation skills on the monster. He saw all its attributes and skills and learned that the monster was a level 25 chameleon warrior. Rude felt strange and said that this monster usually fought in coordination with its friends, but now there was only one in front of him. After that, he smiled and said he would test his new abilities on this monster. Quickly, he drew his sword and leaped to attack. The chameleon noticed Rude's attack but couldn't dodge it, and the attack hit its hand. Rude smiled and told the chameleon that its level wasn't bad, but he warned that the next attack would be deadly. Suddenly, Rude didn't have time to attack because the chameleon ran away from him. Rude found it very strange that the chameleon was running away from him, so he quickly chased it and told it to stop. After a while of chasing, Rude saw that they had reached a dead end. He told the chameleon that there was nowhere left to run. However, the chameleon smiled slyly. Rude felt something was wrong with that look, and when he looked back, he realized he was trapped in the chameleon's trap because 2 more chameleons appeared. Rude was very worried and knew he was in a difficult situation despite their different levels. At that moment, the first chameleon started moving and attacked Rude, but Rude quickly dodged the attack. He decided to fight them one by one. First, he attacked the first chameleon, which struggled to withstand his sword strike and fell to the ground. Rude took advantage of the moment and attacked again to finish it off, but unfortunately, another chameleon came and stopped the attack just in time. Rude was surprised and at the same time noticed that the third chameleon was coming to attack him from behind. Quickly, Rude moved and managed to dodge the attack at the last second, making the chameleon angry. Rude smiled and told the chameleon that the attack almost killed him. Suddenly, Rude found himself surrounded by many chameleons. He felt very nervous and thought that they were now coordinating their attacks well and even planning strategies. He remembered that before they attacked, he heard a loud noise from the chameleon. At that moment, Rude couldn't think because they immediately attacked him. Rude stood his ground to withstand their attacks and saw that there was a larger chameleon behind them that wasn't doing anything. At that moment, he used his investigation skills on the chameleon and found that it was level 32 and had leadership skills. Rude was very happy and smiled because he finally found his leader. At that moment, the chameleon shouted, giving orders to its followers. The followers obeyed the orders and attacked Rude again. Rude stood in front of them and used his physical motivation skills, massively increasing his strength. He shouted and ran among the monsters. As he ran towards the leader, he saw a chameleon in front of him, so he jumped over its head and said that the leader would die now. Rude reached the leader and attacked him in the chest, but he was shocked to see that his attack had no effect. The leader looked at him and drew his sword to stab Rude. Rude was very worried because he might not be able to dodge the attack, but then he used the skill he had obtained from eating spiders, the iron body. He laughed and told the leader that he wasn't the only one with a hidden ace. At that moment, the chameleon leader suddenly stopped and retreated. Rude felt strange and didn't know what was happening, so he used his investigation skills to find out. He discovered that the chameleon leader couldn't strengthen his skin, which was very odd since Rude's previous attack had no effect. Rude quickly realized that the ability came from someone else's power. He quickly continued to use his skills and looked at all the monsters, but found none with special abilities. Suddenly, he saw a wounded chameleon with the same attack pattern he had used on the leader. When he used his investigation skills on the chameleon, he found that it had a substitute skill. Rude understood that if he injured one of them, the damage would be transferred to another. Without waiting any longer, he immediately attacked the chameleon and stabbed it in the stomach, saying that now the chameleon could no longer be a substitute. He then turned to the leader and said not to take his actions personally. The leader was very angry because his plan had failed, so he and his followers immediately attacked Rude. However, before they could reach Rude, he used his thread manipulation skills and released threads from his hands, using them to climb to the ceiling. The monsters were surprised by Rude's movement. Rude continued to release threads from both hands and told the monsters that gathering together would only make things easier for him. Using his skills, he threw a net over all of them. The group leader was shocked and tried to order them to move, but unfortunately, the net was very strong and immobilized them completely. Finally, Rude descended and looked at the leader, saying that he had won. Quickly, he cut off the leader's head. At that moment, Rude had killed all the chameleons in the place, so he sheathed his sword on his back and smiled, saying it was time to eat. Rude prepared the magic bag he had bought and used it. The bag had the advantage that the space inside could expand with magic so the owner could put anything in it, and once the bag was closed, the weight of the items inside disappeared. Rude put his hand into the bag and took out some cooking utensils and spices. Then, he started cutting up the monsters he had killed as if they were edible animals. He recalled being in a new labyrinth and eating monsters just to survive, but now he would do something he enjoyed, cooking monsters. After finishing cutting up the monsters, he put the meat into a pot over the fire and added spices. After a while, the meat was cooked, and Rude took it to start eating. He was very happy and satisfied with the delicious taste of the food. He devoured his meal heartily and said who would have thought that monster meat could taste so good. He also said that he was now officially addicted to monster meat. By eating monsters, Rude gained new skills such as single-handed combat, shield arts, swamp resistance, and leadership skills. Rude thought and wondered if these skills would be truly useful to him. And about his strength, what would he do? The important thing was that time passed with him. Rude was at level 211 of the Swamp Labyrinth, which contained a swarm of butterflies and fierce frogs. However, Rude used the Swamp Wolf skill and gathered his energy, using Lightning Cloak on those monsters and electrocuting them to death. Rude smiled as he did so and said that this skill was very useful. He also realized that these monsters were adept at infecting enemies with diseases, but unfortunately, they chose the wrong opponent. After that, Rude took out a pan and decided to cook frog and butterfly meat. After finishing cooking, he ate the frog meat and found that it was tender. He was very impressed with the spices he always used because they made the food taste even better. Meanwhile, Rude acquired poison skills, temperature resistance, paralysis powder, poison powder, and wind cutting skills. Suddenly, Rude heard a crashing sound beside him that came from a human. He was very surprised at that moment and wondered if there were adventurers who had managed to get this far in the labyrinth. After that, he ate the last piece of meat he had and packed all his tools into the bag so he could move. Indeed, he moved quickly and told himself that it was very rare for someone to reach this deep level in the labyrinth, and he felt lucky if he could exchange a little information with them. On the other hand, we approached the sound and saw a man named Safe who was bleeding. There was a team of 4 people standing in front of a girl who had fallen and was injured. The girl was holding her shoulder and speaking because her injury was very severe. One of them spoke and said that he couldn't believe the girl still had magical energy. The team leader replied that their efforts would pay off. He reached out to uncover the girl's face. When he saw her, the leader was very surprised because he couldn't believe their target was an elf. The man spoke to his comrades and asked how much this elf could be sold for. However, before anyone could answer, Rude arrived at the scene and talked to them. He said that he initially wanted to befriend the adventurers here, but now he had changed his mind. The team members were surprised by the voice and didn't know who he was and how he could get to this place. Rude continued to speak and said that he didn't fully know their story, but he couldn't stand by and watch a group of men attack a girl. The team leader looked at Rude after hearing those words and asked who he was. Rude replied that he was a class adventurer. The elf girl was very frightened when she learned that Rude was an adventurer and shouted for him to run immediately. She understood that these people were adventure hunters. Rude was very surprised to learn this and said to himself that he had heard that these hunters were high-level adventurers. He used his exploration skills on them to see their stats and found that the leader's level was 65, but his attributes and skills were not visible at all. The same applied to the other team members. Their levels were visible, but there was no information about their attributes or skills. Rude was even more surprised and wondered if these hunters had concealment skills or some kind of anti-magic tool. At that moment, the team leader grew bored and told his subordinates to kill Rude immediately. One of the team members immediately attacked Rude with a sword. Rude was surprised and barely managed to draw his sword to parry the attack at the last moment. The hunter spoke and said that Rude's performance was quite good, but Rude knew he was only saying that because he was weak. The hunter was very angry and attacked Rude with all his might. Rude remained standing and struggled to fight back. At that moment, the other team members just stood and watched because they felt their friend was not in danger. At the same time, Rude took a deep breath to use his poisonous skill. He released green poison onto his enemy's face. The attack was so strong that it made the hunter fall to the ground and scream in pain while holding his face. The other team members were very surprised and couldn't believe that Rude could release poison from his mouth, saying that he must be like a monster. Rude approached the hunters, telling himself that their fighting style was reckless and unlike other adventurers. The team leader felt something was off and wondered if poison was one of Rude's special skills. He thought Rude couldn't be underestimated if he possessed such abilities. He then told his subordinates to attack Rude together. The subordinates immediately followed the command and quickly attacked Rude. Rude parried the first attack with his sword and stepped back to distance himself from them. At that moment, the team leader, already prepared, attacked Rude with a kick. Rude was very worried and immediately used his iron body skill. When the leader's attack hit Rude's face, it only knocked him into the swamp water. The leader realized Rude's body was extremely strong, as he had expected the attack to break his neck. Rude began to rise from the swamp after falling, but one of the hunters smiled and said he would kill Rude right then and there, moving towards him. However, in the blink of an eye, Rude dodged the attack and ran away. The hunter yelled at him to stop running, but the team leader ordered the pursuing hunter to stop immediately. He said the swamp they were in was poisonous, and if the hunter continued, he might not be able to get out again. He also understood that Rude couldn't last long in the swamp and would come out soon. Time passed, and Rude remained standing in the swamp, telling himself how long the hunters would stay there. He felt lucky because the swamp's poison kept them from approaching him, and the toxic fumes around the swamp were also affecting them. At that moment, 2 hunters standing in front of the swamp began to look tired, and one of them wondered how long Rude could last in the swamp. His friend replied that he couldn't last any longer because his head hurt and he felt unwell. Rude talked to himself again, seeing them in such a state, feeling it was the right time to come out, although he wished they were more affected by the poison. However, the problem was the situation would become dangerous for the injured fairy he wanted to help. Rude emerged from the swamp and asked the hunters how they felt being poisoned. One of them replied, seeing Rude come out, saying that he finally gave up. But Rude responded that, unfortunately, he was not affected by the poison at all and didn't know how much pain they were feeling right now. The team leader was furious and said to Rude that he had poison neutralization skills and had been deceiving them from the start. He then shouted at his subordinates to kill Rude immediately. One of the hunters attacked Rude right away, but Rude easily parried his attack. The hunter felt he couldn't attack anymore, and Rude said the poison had weakened their resistance. Additionally, being in the swamp also reduced their attributes. Rude noticed the second hunter was not there. The second hunter had moved behind Rude to attack him, but the attack did not affect Rude because he used his iron body skill. This surprised the hunter greatly, and not only that, but Rude also used the Thundercloak skill, emitting golden lightning from his body and electrocuting the two hunters around him. Rude sheathed his sword after finishing, and we see one hunter dead while the other is still alive and very angry, continuing to insult Rude. Rude then used a new skill, Butterfly Wind Slash, and with that skill, he attacked the hunter with wind blades, successfully defeating him. The team leader sat in fear, counting Rude's skills, from poison to iron body and other skills. He shouted, asking how a human could have monster skills. Rude approached him and attacked, knowing he didn't need to answer his question. He then wounded him, realizing that he was currently stronger than anyone in the battle. He continued to attack the team leader, who finally realized he was in danger. Rude felt confident that he had done everything he could in first aid. He wondered why there was a fairy in such an area, as it was very rare. He began to wonder about the conditions the fairy had experienced that led adventurers to drive them away. At that moment, Rude and the fairy heard the sound of a monster nearby. They immediately headed toward the sound and found a giant butterfly in front of them. Rude asked for help from the butterfly leader he had met earlier while using his exploration ability. He found that the monster was at level 37 and could see all its attributes and abilities. Rude immediately attacked the monster, thinking, I won't be intimidated just because the monster is big. The butterfly used a sharp wind attack, but Rude managed to dodge it. However, the attack almost hit the fairy, making her very scared. Rude asked if the fairy was okay. After making sure the fairy was fine, Rude turned back to the monster and cursed it, saying, I will make you suffer like you did to her. He said, don't think I can't reach you just because you can fly. Rude smiled and used his sharp wind attack, managing to injure the monster. The monster was angry and spewed paralyzing fluid at Rude. However, Rude smiled, knowing he was immune to the attack. But then he remembered that the attack could hit the fairy, making him very worried. The fairy pulled out her wand and managed to deflect the fluid away from her. Then, the fairy launched a strong wind attack that brought the monster down to the ground. Rude was amazed at the fairy's wind magic and power. The situation continued like that, and finally, Rude stabbed his sword into the monster's head and successfully killed it. The fairy then spoke to Rude and asked, how can poison and paralysis not affect you? And how can your abilities resemble those of a monster? Rude proudly sheathed his sword and said, actually, I don't know how to explain it to you. But before he could continue, the fairy fell to her knees, looking very tired. Rude asked if she was affected by the paralyzing fluid, but the fairy replied that it was a different problem. She said, later, when we get out of here, I'll tell you everything. After a while, they exited the labyrinth and went into the forest. They sat under the shade of a tree. The fairy felt comfortable with the view and told Rude that the place was beautiful outside the labyrinth. Then, the fairy introduced herself as Alika, a former adventurer. Rude was surprised and said, I didn't expect you to know me. Rude said he knew Alika from the S-Class Azure team in the Kingdom of Lodia, where no one knew the appearance of the team members, but from his memory, Alika's name had been mentioned before. Alika recounted that 5 years ago, their team was defeated by a monster that merged in the depths of the S-Class labyrinth. Their leader was killed, and his body was torn in half. The second member left the mission due to severe injuries, and the third member was swallowed by the labyrinth. Alika herself didn't come out unscathed and showed a purple mark on her chest. Rude asked what the mark meant, and Alika explained that it was a curse that significantly reduced her level. Rude had never heard of such a curse before. Alika said she had tried various ways to break the curse but could only slow its progression. Adventurer hunters learned about her curse and wanted to gain wealth from it. Alika felt desperate because she would die when her level reached 0 but couldn't accept the fate of being at the mercy of those evil people. Rude then had the idea to use his substitution ability, which allowed him to receive any attack or effect from others. He asked Alika to accept his ability, and Alika agreed. Rude used his ability, and Alika's curse transferred to Rude. Alika screamed for Rude to stop because he would die cursed, but Rude asked Alika to trust him. After the curse was transferred, a monster spirit that created the curse appeared. Alika was worried, but Rude remained calm as his negation ability was activated. A golden light appeared and the monster spirit disappeared. Rude was happy to see his ability succeed, while Alika was still confused and asked for an explanation. Rude asked Alika to check her guild card, and Alika found that her attributes were back to normal because the curse was gone. Rude explained that his ability was negation, so he thought he could help remove the curse. Alika was impressed by Rude's bravery and felt he was crazy to take such a big risk for someone he had just met. However, she thanked Rude. Time passed, and they went to an inn. They ate and drank together, Alika enjoying the good food and drink there. Rude reminded Alika not to drink too much since she had just recovered, but Alika didn't care and said she was fully healed and wanted to celebrate. They toasted, and Alika began to ask about Rude. Rude told her that their village was once attacked by monsters and he lost his family. An S-class adventurer saved him, which made him want to become an S-class adventurer too to protect many people. Alika was impressed with Rude's dream and said it was beautiful. Rude was surprised and asked if Alika wouldn't laugh at him. Alika said she had also dreamed of becoming an S-class, but all her dreams were shattered because of a curse. She had friends who were still trapped in the labyrinth, and she was determined to challenge the monster again. Alika proposed forming a team with Rude because they had the same dream. However, suddenly a man grabbed Alika's hand roughly. The man and his friend invited Alika to drink with them rudely. Rude recognized them as the people who had once kicked him out of the inn. Rude got angry and asked them to let go of Alika. Tension arose, but Alika calmed the situation by challenging them to a drinking competition. They all drank a lot, and eventually, the bullies fell asleep from too much drinking, making Alika the winner. Alika and Rude walked together, and Rude praised Alika for her performance. Alika felt grateful to Rude and said she entered the competition to defend him. When Alika almost fell, Rude used his ability to replace the effects of alcohol on Alika. Alika was impressed with Rude's ability and proposed forming a team together. As they walked, they saw the inn's specialty dish had sold out, disappointing Alika because she couldn't try it. The innkeeper heard and said that the fish dish was no longer available. This was because a monster in the fishing area had eaten all the fish there. He mentioned that he had sent a request to the guild to get rid of the monster, but unfortunately, no adventurers were available. He then offered them the task if they were up for it. Alika and Rude agreed to the task, and after some time, they went to the fishing area. There, Rude and Alika rowed a boat, mesmerized by the beauty of the place. Alika cheered Rude on, saying they had to defeat the monster to enjoy their favorite fish dish. Rude was excited and happy, but suddenly he felt a strange movement behind him. Quickly, he turned towards the sound and was suddenly attacked from underwater. He managed to dodge and smiled, telling Alika to get ready because they had found the monster the fisherman had mentioned. However, it was not that simple, as they were both surprised to find many ferocious fish around them. All the fish were ready to attack the boat. Rude used his investigative skills and found that the fish were level 23, noting their attributes and skills. One fish attacked Rude with a water strike, but Rude quickly deflected it with his sword. All the fish started attacking together. Rude realized that if they kept attacking together like that, he wouldn't be able to avoid all their strikes while on the boat. So, he immediately jumped into the water, which shocked Alika. Rude descended among the fish, lifted his head, smiled, and said he was now in the middle of them. The fish didn't wait and immediately attacked, but Rude had a plan. He used his cloak of light, dazzling all the fish around him. The light was so bright that it could be seen from outside the water. After many fish died, Rude emerged from the water. Alika called out to warn him. Rude said everything was fine but felt frustrated because some fish were still alive. The fish were alive because they gathered in the deepest part of the water. He wondered if they were at that depth for a reason or if something was protecting them down there. Rude called Alika and said he would dive deeper to investigate something. Alika was again surprised by his actions, but Rude carried out his plan. He tied a rope around his waist and started diving. As he dove, the fish avoided him, confirming that they were protecting something. When Rude focused, he found a monster surrounded by the fish. Using his investigative skills, he discovered that the monster was level 38, noting its attributes and skills. Rude thought the monster resembled a giant crab. As Rude observed the situation, one of the monster's claws detached from its body and turned into a ferocious fish. At that moment, Rude realized that the monster in front of him was responsible for producing these ferocious fish. He thought that if he didn't kill the monster, a major problem would arise because the ferocious fish would never be exhausted. He began to plan, but suddenly, before he could think further, the monster moved one of its claws and grabbed Rude tightly. Immediately after that, the ferocious fish began to move and attack him. Rude realized that the fish hadn't attacked him earlier because it was all a trap. He grabbed one of the monster's claws and used his cloak of light skill, thinking that the attack should kill the monster because of direct contact. However, a surprise occurred when the monster's claw broke off. Rude was shocked and thought the monster had just used its self-amputation skill. The monster moved and almost attacked Rude. When Rude felt in great danger, he signaled Alika to pull him with the rope. Alika saw the signal and quickly pulled him using her magic. She said that Rude didn't need to worry about anything. The monster's attack was missed because Rude had already moved away from it. The monster was very angry and continued to glare at Rude. After a while, Rude moved away from the place and emerged from the water with Alika to rest on the beach. There, Rude panted, and Alika asked if he was okay. Rude thanked her and said that without her, he might have died. He told Alika that there was a big monster at the bottom of the sea responsible for producing the ferocious fish and that the monster had fast healing skills. Therefore, they had to return quickly before the monster recovered. Alika felt unhappy and said that the monster was in its habitat in the water and her magic couldn't reach the sea floor to help him. She asked if Rude had another plan. Rude knew there was no other option but one solution and started thinking about that plan. He said to himself that since Alika had told him about her curse and formed a team with him, it would be better to tell her his secret than to make her find out on her own and lose her trust. Rude grabbed one of the ferocious fish and asked Alika not to tell anyone what he was about to show her. Alika was shocked and remained silent to see what Rude would do. Before we know what happened, we switch to a time at the sea floor where the monster is still present and see something quickly coming from above. It turned out to be Rude, using his fast swimming skills. He moved among the fish that tried to attack him and easily killed the fish he encountered. He approached the monster quickly. The monster attacked with all its claws, but Rude quickly dodged the strikes and approached the monster's main body. He stabbed his sword into the monster's body and smiled as the sword went in. He used his Cloak of Light skill and defeated the monster completely. Rude felt relieved because the area would now be peaceful again. He thought the problem now was that Alika saw him eat the monster after it died and wondered how she would feel and what she would do when they returned to town. Rude emerged from the water and arrived at the beach, but he didn't find Alika. He thought he had hoped too much that Alika would wait for him. However, suddenly, Alika came and said he was late and asked if he was okay, indicating that he had defeated the monster. Rude confirmed and told her he had defeated it. Alika was happy and said she had gathered some wood to make a bonfire, which would be very useful for drying their clothes. Rude was surprised by her actions and asked if she had no problem with what she saw. Alika replied that although she was surprised, in the end, Rude trusted her and told her his secret, and she had to respect that. Rude was impressed by her reaction and sheathed his sword. He thanked her, and after the situation calmed down, he pulled the monster from the water and said he wanted to take some skills from the monster. Rude was ready for that, cutting the monster into small pieces to eat. He also took other fish and told Alika that he thought it wasn't fair for him to eat the monster alone, so he brought fish for her. Alika was happy because the fish was what she wanted, and she said she would eat it now. Rude smiled at her and said they should eat first and he would tell her about the first time he ate a monster. That night passed with Rude preparing the food while Alika ate the fish and said it was very delicious. She said that eating a monster was strange and asked why Rude did it. Rude replied that the reason he did it was that it helped him get closer to his dream, even though he was just an rank adventurer. Alika smiled at him and said he was a good person because he used his power to save her. She asked if the monster was really tasty when cooked. With the food in front of them, it was clear that it tasted very good. Rude added that he was surprised to find out that the monster had a delicious taste. Rude was full and told Alika that he was no longer hungry. He offered Alika a bite of the monster he had eaten. Alika refused, knowing she didn't have the same protection as Rude and that the effects of eating a monster would quickly affect her. After that, Alika asked again if Rude truly wanted to join her team. She inquired about any additional requirements that needed to be fulfilled. The officer checked Rude's documents and noted that he had achieved many remarkable feats. However, the only thing missing was battle registration. Upon hearing this, Alika told the officer they wanted to take on a mission together. The officer asked them to wait for a moment to get the mission. Sure enough, after a while, they went to a place near the city and learned that their mission was to exterminate a pack of gray wolves. These wolves were level 1, but their skills and attributes were quite good. Rude suddenly appeared at the location and used his spider stealth skill to approach the pack unnoticed. Quickly, Rude attacked and managed to kill one of the wolves. Another wolf saw what happened and howled loudly to warn the pack of the enemy. The pack heard the howl and immediately chased after Rude. Rude started to run from the pack and asked Alika to step in. Alika quickly summoned a small spirit named Sylvain and requested her power. Rude observed this and realized it was Alika's special skill, spirit magic. Once Sylvain appeared, Alika's magic energy increased significantly. At that moment, the wolves changed their direction and attacked Alika. However, Alika used wind magic, unleashing sharp winds that cut through all the wolves in their path. Rude was amazed by Alika's incredible power and thought no one in the world could withstand such an attack. Alika then mentioned that her power hadn't fully recovered after a curse she suffered. Rude became even more anxious, imagining how powerful Alika would be at full strength. Just then, Rude sensed something approaching from behind. More wolves were coming, and one of them leaped to attack Rude. Rude was distressed, unaware of the many hidden wolves. In this critical situation, Alika shouted for Sylvain, causing Rude to vanish from the spot. The wolves were confused, searching for Rude and Alika but couldn't find them. One of the wolves looked up and was shocked to see Rude flying, thanks to Alika's help. Rude was happy and thanked Alika for saving him. Alika reminded Rude to thank Sylvain, as she was the one who saved him. Alika also warned Rude to stay vigilant as she saw 5 wolves watching them from the forest, indicating many more were hiding. Rude listened to Alika and said it was his turn now. Rude used his true perception skill to see all the hidden wolves, numbering around 30. He smiled and said they just needed to kill those wolves to complete the mission. Rude shouted to Alika to attack the spot he pointed out. The wolves started to run in fear due to the sudden quick attack. Alika attacked them but didn't hit any. Rude did this on purpose because his true perception skill lost accuracy in open areas, making it hard for Alika to attack from the air. He planned to attack from the side, gathering all the wolves in one place. Alika informed Rude she was done, and Rude told her to leave the rest to him. Rude appeared behind the wolves and used paralyzing breath, emitting a green smoke that made all the wolves pass out. Afterward, they discovered they had defeated 52 wolves. Alika was shocked and said she couldn't believe they faced that many. Rude said it wasn't difficult and asked if Sylvain was her spirit. Alika replied yes, explaining that she could use the power of spirits in nature. Alika could create powerful magic with little magical energy and do amazing things like flying. Rude was amazed and said it was the first time he realized how powerful wind magic could be. Sylvain appeared and pulled Rude's hair, causing him pain and making him scream. Alika laughed and said Sylvain liked to joke around. Alika noticed it was getting dark and said they needed to leave quickly. Sylvain granted Rude the ability to fly, and they started heading back. Rude was delighted and played around in the air, saying it was the best feeling in the world. He asked Alika about other types of magic she could use besides wind. Alika explained that she was also skilled in water, ice, light, and earth magic, but not very good with dark and fire spirits. As they flew, Rude saw smoke in the distance. Alika said there should be a village there. They saw the burning village and a terrifyingly large monster. The villagers were running in fear, and the adventurers there were also confused since there should have been no monsters other than gray wolves in the area. They became more anxious upon seeing the monster Baphomet. Baphomet attacked with a fire spear, but the adventurers were saved by Rude's water magic using spirit assistance. Baphomet was angry at Rude's interference, and Alika came to help the adventurers. Alika told the adventurers not to worry because she and Rude would handle the monster. Rude used his exploration skills to get information about Baphomet, finding it was level 27. Rude realized that Baphomet was much stronger than ordinary monsters. Baphomet attacked with 4 fire spears, and Rude dodged them. Rude approached Baphomet to try and drain its magic power, but Baphomet wouldn't allow it. Rude was surprised by this unexpected resistance. Baphomet attacked again with earth magic, but Rude survived thanks to Alika's wind magic. Alika helped Rude by using water magic to clear a path. Rude finally managed to get close to Baphomet and cut off its finger. Baphomet became enraged and attacked again, but Alika assisted with fire magic. Rude and Alika worked well together, and eventually they defeated Baphomet. The villagers watched from a distance, shocked by their victory. Alika told Rude they succeeded because of their good teamwork and reminded him to stay alert. Rude thanked Alika for her help, and they returned to the village, feeling satisfied after defeating the giant monster. "Is he okay or hurt?" he asked. He replied that he was fine and that the vampire had been defeated, saying he had struck a deadly blow. However, if the vampire survived, he might attack the village again. But he reassured them that his team was there. Then he asked if he could request assistance. The adventurer replied that as long as it was something he could do, he wouldn't hesitate. Then he laughed and said he just wanted a bit of food because he was very hungry. Time passed, and we saw him cooking monster meat. At that moment, Alika returned and told him she was back. He welcomed her back and asked about the people in the village. Alika assured him that everyone there was fine, thanks to the adventurers who helped with the evacuation. Then she said she told them they would drive away Baphomet so no villagers would question the missing monster's body. Rude listened to her words and became very excited when he saw the food. He said it looked delicious. At that moment, the Baphomet soup was ready, and as usual, he added some spices and immediately tasted it. He told Alika that it had a goat aroma but tasted very good. When Rude ate Baphomet's meat, he gained basic fire and earth magic skills, along with other abilities. Alika watched Rude and said that seeing him eat like that made her feel the food was delicious. But she also explained that watching a human eat monster meat was unsettling. Rude stopped eating and realized she was right. He felt that getting used to eating monsters was frightening. After some time, a monster appeared in the forest, a level 22 boar with a quick step skill. Rude was surprised and said the monster was very small. He then stood up and tried to use his magic by waving his hand, but nothing happened. Alika called out to Rude, and he tried again, but still nothing. Suddenly, one of the monsters used the quick step skill, activating when it ran straight for a certain distance. Rude was very worried about what would happen, so he and Alika immediately jumped and managed to avoid the boar's attack. However, the problem was that the boar had knocked Rude's food to the ground. At that moment, Alika was talking to Rude and said that she thought he could already use magic. However, she informed Rude that her magical power was now depleted and she wouldn't be able to support him. Rude was still angry about the spilled food and didn't respond to Alika. He told the monsters that he would never abandon them because he was very tired of gathering all that food. He became even angrier and said that he would blame those pigs and would eat all their meat. Then he ran toward them in full rage, but suddenly Alika grabbed Rude's clothes and tried to calm him down. She told Rude that the quick step ability would make the pigs gather great energy and their attacks would be very effective. She also told Rude that even though their chances of getting hit would be small now, they didn't want to get hurt. Alika continued and told Rude that now they had no choice but to retreat. Sure enough, they both ran very fast and the pigs kept chasing them to catch them. After some time, they managed to hide in a tree and escape from the pigs. When the situation had calmed down, Alika spoke to Rude and asked about his inactive magical energy. Rude replied that this was the first time in his life he couldn't use the abilities he had acquired. Alika listened to his words and suggested that he use his exploration ability to see his magical capabilities. Rude liked the idea, and when he did it, he found that fire and stone magic were still within him, and he also discovered information on how to use them instinctively. Alika also saw this and then said that his inability to use magic was most likely due to his mind not being able to believe that he could use magic. However, after some thought, Alika realized that Rude could use fire magic, albeit in a simple way, and this indicated that the previous analysis might be wrong. Suddenly, Alika got another idea and thought that Rude should use magic like the monsters to get out of this situation. Alika told Rude that he needed to learn how to control mana first. Rude listened to her words and understood that now he had to forget about magic and focus on mana as Alika said. But when he asked how to do it, Alika replied that she didn't have any information about what mana was. Rude prepared himself, extended his hand, and decided to try again. Then, he began to remember the first time he ate a mentor and his body started to fully recover. He also remembered the great energy explosion that happened in his body and told himself that if he could release such energy from his body, he would be able to use magic. Rude focused more and felt a strange energy within him. Meanwhile, Alika watched Rude with awe at the progress he was making. Then Rude slowly began to open his eyes and suddenly opened them very quickly because he realized that he had created a magic circle. This made him very happy and he understood that as long as he could feel mana, he could use that power easily. Excitedly, Rude raised his hand and threw a fire spear at the pigs. As a result, there was a great explosion and all the pigs died.